Okay, we're here with Congressman Chris Gibson, who is seeking his second three-year term in office. And what we want to do is just take some questions that we've gathered from the community and allow you to respond to your constituents in leading up to the election in November.
Right.
So go ahead and make your opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Ariel. Yvonne, thanks for the opportunity. And for those that are tuning in, I appreciate this opportunity. In a very challenging political time, I'm doing my very best to bring people together to get things done for our area, for upstate New York, and for our country, with a focus on jobs, constituent-driven legislation, listening to our constituents, to our experts in many different areas, and looking to bring their voice to the halls of Congress and to affect legislation that moves us forward. For example, with regard to job creation, the Farm Bill. Listening to our fruit and vegetable growers here and knowing that the crop insurance program doesn't work for us up here in the Northeast. It's written more for those that grow thousands and thousands of acres of one particular crop in the Midwest. We were able to change that in law, working with Sean Patrick Maloney, also from the Hudson Valley. We brought that into the federal farm bill that the president signed into law earlier this year. Listening to our conservation advocates, including like Ned Sullivan, Andy Bicken, Peter Patton, Becky Thornton, and others, we brought significant reforms and strengthened the conservation title with the farm bill. Listening to the young farmer advocates, right here in the Hudson Valley, we brought forward new provisions that help those that are literally and figuratively trying to get their roots in the ground here with regard to agriculture, strengthen the young farmer's title. We listened to dairy. Dairy's big concern was coming out of 2009 when the floor fell out of the hundredweight price. We had farmers who were milking their cows 7 days a week to lose money. We can't have that. We have to fight for our family farms, and so we changed the safety net for dairy in the federal farm bill, and our dairy farmers here in upstate New York made a difference in that provision. Organic. Listening to the organic farmers here in the Hudson Valley, they asked for more research. We know there's a direct correlation between the research and the yield of their crops, and they asked for the ability to promote themselves with a checkoff program, and we delivered on that as well. So, all that broadband expansion, fighting Lyme disease, constituent-driven legislation that helps create jobs. Infrastructure bill. We just recently, the president signed into law, after working with the Congress, about $11 billion bill that's going to ensure we continue to have confidence in our roads and bridges, water and sewer, and we keep our contractors and building trades professionals to work. Right not far from here, viewers and readers of the Daily Freeman are working at the Tappan Zee Bridge. And that was, in large measure, supported by the infrastructure bill that came from Washington, D.C. Job training. Look, this is really important. Even in an economy of 6.1% unemployment, we have over 3 million jobs unfilled in our country, in part because our aspirants are lacking the skills. And so what we've done is, the president just signed this into law a couple of weeks ago. This bill helps with one-stop shopping for those that are looking for jobs to come to the Workforce Innovation Board, and it allows them to get refinement, review of their resume, and improvement. It allows them to get interview skills and to hone those interviewing skills, VOTEC training, and this also provides for money for jobs fairs where we bring together those who are looking for a job, those looking to hire, and it also supports the Jobs Corps, which is a really important entity here in upstate New York, and I'll be giving a couple of graduation speeches here in the next couple of weeks to support the Jobs Corps. An important job training bill, constituent-driven, helping us with job creation here in upstate New York. Lowering taxes. Look, at the beginning of this Congress, for about 12 hours or so, our taxes went up, but we were able to bring them back down, and for nearly everyone in this district, we were able to put into permanent law the 2001-2003 tax cuts. And that's going to help us put more in our pocket to spend on our priorities. The water bill. The water bill reforms the Army Corps of Engineers. It provides for resources for dam safety and for other water projects that are very important to us. It provides for locks and gauges. Gauges help us with early warning for water events. This is important constituent-driven legislation that complemented the Sandy Aid bill, which also provided resources. We come to know it, and you report on it, the New York Rising program that's helping us throughout upstate New York. This comes by way of our federal tax dollars, by way of the Sandy Aid bill. And then appropriations for tourism. we were able to reauthorize and appropriate about $500,000 for the Hudson Valley program that helps promote tourism here. And this is a legacy of Maurice Hinchey, but our office has picked it up, and we're fortunate enough that in the budget agreement, we were able to get that done this past December. This is just a sampling of some of the things we've done to help the upstate New York economy, to bring people together to get things done. And look, there's a series of other bills that have passed the House that we're waiting on action in the Senate. But these things that I just listed are actually items that became law that the President of the United States signed that helped us move forward. So that's job creation, fiscal responsibility. Look, my last year in the Army, the annual deficit was over $1.4 trillion. And this year, at the end of this year, we'll have cut the deficit by 60%. This is really important because, we want future generations to have the same choices and freedoms that we've had. So we need to work our way back to a balanced budget over time. And then when we get there, we need to stay there. And just as it's important to ensure that future generations don't inherit a mountain of debt, it's the same thing about the environment. Why we need to protect this environment, because we don't want future generations to have an earth that's unsustainable and uninhabitable. So, oftentimes you see the left and the right talk past one another, and, the deficit and the environment can be two examples, where the right thinks the left doesn't understand why we need to get back to a balanced budget, and the left thinks the right doesn't understand why we need to protect the earth. To me, I actually think they're talking past each other and actually saying the same thing, which is, let's make sure that we're very responsible when it comes to future generations, that we set them up for success. And, look, as part of this, with regard to fiscal responsibility, we passed the first federally enacted budget in 5 years. This group that I'm a leader in, No Labels, that brings Democrats and Republicans together, had a large part in that. And in the Q&A, I hope we can go into more detail, but it was important that we get a federal budget. Local priorities, and I'll close with this in my opening statement. Local priorities, Lyme. Lyme and tick-borne diseases is a public health scourge for us in upstate New York. We have worked to get more resources for prevention, for diagnosis, for treatment, and now we're working on a standalone bill that's made its way through full committee at the Energy and Commerce, and we expect a floor vote here in the near term that will require the Department of Health and Human Services to have a plan. A working group that will put input into that plan will ensure that our chronic Lyme sufferers have a voice at the table, and that their medical health professionals, their doctors who've been assisting them, also get a voice in where our research dollars go. Why this is so important is, in my estimation, the Centers for Disease Control, their guidelines that provide for the treatment protocols for these tick-borne diseases is too narrow. It doesn't even acknowledge the existence of chronic Lyme. We're changing that in this bill by getting input at the table, and we think that will also impact the amount of insurance company coverage. Because, when I go to insurance companies and I say, how come you're not paying more for what our constituents are going through? They say, well, if it was approved care, then we pay for it. This is why it's so important to impact the CDC guidelines, because it will help get better treatment protocols and better insurance company coverage going forward. VA reform. We just enacted, the President signed into law in the last 2 weeks, the most significant reform to the VA in my lifetime, and I turned 50 this year. And I hope in the Q&A we'll have a chance to go into more detail there, but this is a priority we put in our office for veterans. Not only the reform, and this is obviously the most recent catalyst is what happened in Arizona and other parts of the country, but this has been an issue we've been working on since I arrived in the Congress. I'm proud of this bill, and I do believe it's going to make a difference. We've done other things to help veterans, working with Senator Nelson, the former astronaut, a Democrat from Florida. We put language into the National Defense Policy Bill that the President of the United States signed into law last December that will require the DoD and the VA to merge their medical software systems, and that's really important. And I hope in the Q&A we have a chance I can explain to you why, but it's important because our veterans who are suffering from post-traumatic stress, we want them to have seamlessness from when they leave active duty to when they come back home to their communities. I also work on initiatives with other constituents here, including Carol Olzanicki, whose husband died of Agent Orange complications at the age of 57. So we have a Blue Water Navy bill that's helping those veterans, and I hope maybe we get a chance to talk about that in the Q&A, among other veterans initiatives. Look, the Violence Against Women Act that we got into law this Congress was really important, that we reauthorize and provide the resources. We have important advocacy groups and support groups right here in Kingston that counted on that bill. The Washburn House, gets supported by funding from the Violence Against Women Act. And along with 16 other Republicans, we helped ensure that that got put on for a vote, and we got that put into law. Now I'm the Republican author of the international version of this, the International Violence Against Women Act, and we do have some local advocates in New Paltz that we've been working with to make that so. FERC, look, myself and Sean Patrick Maloney have been fighting this one really hard, and we were able to get it through the United States House of Representatives, defunding the FERC's ability to implement these new capacity zones that have spiked our electricity costs. And if we can get that passed through the Senate and the President will sign it, we can lower our electricity costs. This is another issue where we've been working really hard in a bipartisan way to lower energy costs for us here, because we believe that helps our hardworking families and it helps small businesses. The heroin epidemic. I got an amendment passed in the United States House of Representatives that increased the amount of federal funding that goes into what is yet another public health scourge for us. It's certainly prevention, it's enforcement, it's treatment, but we were helped to bring more resources to the fight here for our local areas, and there certainly is much more that needs to be done. I got two more points and I'll close. Common sense, not common core. This is another area I've been fighting since I arrived into Congress. Teachers are special. I mean, they already know they're not going to be rich, but they get to be rich at heart by inspiring, inculcating, and educating. And what we need to do is empower them. We don't need a bureaucrat in Washington telling us how to educate our kids. And I've never seen teacher morale so challenged, and I'm looking to give them tangible proof that we understand, we're listening, and we're fighting for them. So I'm the Republican author. It's a bipartisan bill with Kirsten Sinema, a Democrat from Arizona, that rolls back the onerous high-stakes testing regime. And we're looking, once again, to empower teacher, parents, and students. War powers. Look, I mean, nothing could be more serious than when a nation such as ours decides when or if we're going to go to war. This should be something that the people have a voice in. And particularly since the advent of the nuclear age, we've consolidated war powers into the executive branch, and presidents from both political parties have taken us off to war without the consent of the governed. This must change. We need to do this as a people. We need to rise up and change this, because we should have a voice in this. I have a bill that does just that, H.R. 373. There are 45 folks on this bill, members. It's a bipartisan bill, and I hope in the Q&A I have a chance to talk more about why I think that's so important to our republic. And then finally, casework. In addition to all these legislative priorities, we have offices throughout the 19th Congressional District, which is 11 counties, 165 towns, and nearly 750,000 people. And we work hard for them every single day, including here in Kingston. And if folks need assistance, advocacy with the federal government, we'd ask them to reach out to our office right here in Kingston. Or if those are watching from Dutchess County in Hyde Park, or if you may be watching in Sullivan County in Liberty. So thank you for this opportunity. This is just a sampling of some of our work, but I did want to share with those, because we often hear people say, well, the Congress, it's not doing enough to help us. And I will tell you that in a challenging time, I'm working hard to bring people together, and a fair number of things we've gotten into law have not gotten a lot of coverage in the media. And I just gave you a sampling of some of the things we've enacted. Democrats and Republicans in the House, with Democrats and Republicans in the Senate, working with the President. Bills that we've enacted into law that help us here in upstate New York, and we'll continue to fight for our priorities that our constituents are looking for representation in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Okay, you covered a lot of topics there.
Well, we just opened them, actually, so you feel free to follow up, because I can give you an extensive amount of details on any of those if you're interested.
Okay, let's start with one of the local issues, which is water issues, watershed.
Yeah.
You formed a watershed advisory
thank
group.
you.
What's been going on with that group? What kind of initiatives have come out of that? How are you following up on what that group has done?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you that I think this is really important, and we have a real opportunity. For the first time in anyone's memory, we now have the 5 counties and 40 towns all in one congressional district. So we have the opportunity to speak with one voice, and that's the catalyst for that was the fact that we feel here in upstate New York that our interests have not been properly considered by the city and even in the state in some circumstances. You talk to folks in upstate New York, and we firmly believe that we can at once deliver clean water to New York City so that they don't have to go through filtration, but at the same time, consider our views here in upstate New York, our viability, economic viability, our health and safety. And so, what we did first with the Watershed Advisory Group is just listen. We pulled together experts from all across the watershed and heard from them. And we know that we have specific issues with regard to turbidity, concern about safety. We've had circumstances where our people and our property have been damaged in very significant weather events, Hurricanes Irene and Lee and Sandy, just to name three, and some other unnamed storms. And we have been doing research to what degree reservoir levels have contributed to that. And we're looking to advocate with the city and with the state to ensure that we have safe levels in the reservoir such that they are not contributing factors when we have significant water events. In addition to that, we've advocated for more resources for protection of our people and our property. We have made some progress in that, not nearly as much. I'm not satisfied at the level, but there at least has been some acknowledgement and some investment from the city. You talk about the Lower East Sopus and the havoc that's been wreaked on our communities attendant to these weather events and exacerbated by what we believe are some of these policies coming out of the DEP. And in addition, in my interactions with the city, this is a budget of over $30 billion that they have for their water supply in New York City. And yet, even though with that number of $30 billion, they were suing some of our towns for millions or maybe tens of millions of dollars. They've created so much ill will in that process. I've tried to illuminate this fact and say it's better off for them not to sue our towns. What they were doing when they were suing our towns is trying to lower their tax assessments. Perhaps that may give a slight movement in numbers for the city, but what it does to our people, when they end up, if they sue us and we end up lowering assessments in any way, that leaves our small towns with two choices. One, they can either cut services, or two, they have to raise taxes. Neither one of them are good choices for our small towns. When in fact, when you look at the scale of those numbers compared to the $30 billion budget, the city is better off not pursuing those what I would consider acrimonious policies. So, there's a series of issues that come to safety of our people and our property, the viability and the ability of us to survive wet weather events. And you notice the changing weather patterns. What has been considered a 500-year flood, we've had 3 of them now in the last several years. So it's obvious that we have a new normal. The old weather patterns don't hold anymore, and so we have to take action to protect our people, to protect our property. And that's why, the San Diego bill, I think, is very significant, because for the first time we had significant amount of federal dollars that were available to the state to allow us to take mitigation going forward. So I see that as complementary to the work we've been doing in the Watershed Advisory Group, and we're just getting started. And we're continuing. You asked, so the final piece is, what are we doing now? Well, there's a series of smaller groups now that are advocating that our group wants to give, that I want to help them provide a stronger voice. So you see this recently in some of the towns below the watershed here forming, and I want to be helpful to them, to help them speak with one voice, with a stronger voice, so that we can bring more resources to bear. And we're going to continue to do this going forward.
Because there was some concern with those groups below, in the lower Sopus Creek, that they weren't a part of the overall discussion, that their needs were somewhat different from those above the reservoir. So that's why they formed their own groups. I mean, is there any plan to specifically address, like in Saugerties, they've got 2 issues with, the turbidity in the creek, but also
Right.
you get flooding from the river. So how would you address that or help them with those concerns?
Well, I want to say that, first of all, to listen to what they say, and then in my bilateral meetings with the DEP and with my multilateral meetings with the DEP and the DEC and others, is to strengthen their voice and to argue for more resources and to make the case for more resources so that we can, again, address. I see this as part of a larger phenomenon of changing weather patterns and making sure that we bring the resources so that we can, and you say, what does that do, the resources? Well, there is an approach that came out of Colorado on how to deal with these changing weather patterns, and it really is, in my view, a pragmatic approach to what are, in some cases, some ideological approaches. Some people say, well, we should do all maintenance to protect, or dredging, maintenance dredging to protect against the weather events. And there are others who say we should do all floodplains. to protect against these potential significant weather events. Well, the Colorado approach is really an amalgamation of these two approaches. It basically says is look where we can take the pressure out of the stream by allowing for a floodplain in places where humans are not living. That's a good thing, because if all you're doing is maintenance, if all you're doing is dredging, you're actually creating more energy as that stream moves downstream, and when it eventually hits a community, it obliterates, it takes that community out. So, this is an example we're learning from other places around the country and applying that here where we need resources to do that. We can make a difference. So let me say that not only the Lower Esopus, but actually Schoharie County. Schoharie County, we have a place, town of Schoharie and Middleburg and Esperance, that just like Saugerties and just like other towns here below, essentially outside of the technical watershed, but still impacted by the watershed. In Schoharie, we have a significant project going on that's mostly funded by federal taxpayer dollars, but also by the state and a little bit of local, that's helping us with the floodplain and helping us with a little bit of maintenance so that they can survive events such as like Hurricanes Irene and Lee. And that's a $24 million project that's going on in Schoharie County. I bring that up because their needs, because they're below the dam, are similar to some ways that the Lower Esopus. And by the way, there's yet another group in our 19th Congressional District, and that would be Hancock and Deposit. They're also below the dam, and they're impacted by all these issues, but yet they're not part of the 5 counties and 41 towns part of the watershed. So to the larger point that the towns here have been making, they're absolutely right. That heretofore we have been wrangling with the city to bring more resources for those towns that are in the watershed. But what we need is a more expansive view, the fact that even if you're not in the watershed, you're impacted by watershed policies. And so we have to take that into consideration when you're talking about resources that are being brought to upstate New York. We need those for below the dam towns as well.
Okay. And talking about these changing weather patterns and things, it's a good way to go into climate change issues. Some of the readers wanted to know what, in your view, is the best way to address climate change. There's recent economic studies like the REMI study that project a natural revenue-neutral carbon fee and dividend will increase jobs, grow the economy, and put money into the pockets of the poorest 2/3 of the citizenry. What specifically would be required for you to support or even introduce a revenue-neutral carbon fee and dividend?
I would tell you that. Look, I think this is a real issue for us that we need to tackle. I lead in the Congress on this issue. I have the strongest record of any Republican in the country in the United States House of Representatives when it comes to clean and renewable energy and on the environment. And I do have some differences of opinion on how to get there, but we agree on where to go. And that is that over time we need to continue to reduce our emissions so that we can lead the world. And I do believe that we can be an example for other countries around the world. There are some that say, well, even if we make a difference, there'll be other countries that will be polluting the earth, and so ultimately our efforts will be futile. I disagree with that. I think that we have shown over time that our country is a great example. We are every day because of our Constitution, the flourishing form of life. On our best day, other countries want to be like us. So how do we get there then? If we agree on where we need to go, where I am advocating and where my record reflects strength is in research and development and prototyping for renewable energy. You think about your iPhone and your iPad that you have right now, and it has in it nanotechnology properties. And we had engineers that worked on that, such that we lead the world. We actually do the most advanced semiconductor in the world right now in upstate New York. We manufacture that at Global Foundries. Well, what's happening right now is some of those same engineers and some of those same approaches we're now turning and focusing on renewable energy. And this is so incredibly important. This is going to be the place right here, not Germany, not China, not in other places. We're going to be the land where we drive down the total cost for these renewable energy sources such that they proliferate and they're accessible to working class families. So, the accounts that provide for this are the accounts that I vote to plus up and to protect from cuts. These are the research, development, and prototype resources that help us that with the nanotechnology coatings and composites and substitute materials. The goal of the Sunshot program is to drive the total cost of photovoltaics down from, which is roughly 62, 63 cents per kilowatt hour, down to 9 cents per kilowatt hour. And I'm bullish that we can get that done. And when we do, that will transform the way we produce, convey, and consume energy. So research, development, and prototyping. And just to illustrate with an example, when I was 18 years old and I was in advanced individual training, I remember getting a 4-hour pass, and I couldn't wait to go to the PX to buy a Walkman. This was 1982. And that Walkman in $1982 was over $100. I think it was like $120 for a Walkman. Now you can buy that same cassette deck today for about $9. I don't know why you'd want to. You have so many other choices. You got an iPad, you can, an iPod, you can do, but you can buy that cassette deck for $9 because of advancements that have come with research and development and installation, and because of economies of scale that have come with it. What I'm arguing is with that same prioritization in our country, we can make the same difference with renewable energy. And you think about a working class family now in upstate New York, and if they are fortunate enough to own a home, you have to reshingle your home about every 25, 30 years or so if you're lucky, but about every 25 years. Can you imagine the next time when a working class family has to reshingle, if they're able to have accessible, at a price they can afford, photovoltaics that can go on with their shingles on their roof, such that they can not only meet the need of reshingling, but also reduce significantly their cost for energy. Now that's what I'm talking about with our kind of investment in our focus. So that's one area, but there's more. So you look at the latest effort with regard to these power plants, and a lot has been written about the potential reduction of emissions in the power plants. I would argue that there hasn't been a candid discussion about how far we've come already. The administration's goal, and they've been pilloried by some about this, the administration's goal is to cut emissions at power plants by 30% by the year 2030. Okay, now they're using 2005 as the starting point here. But here's the point, is that between 2005 and 2014 today, we're already halfway there. We've already cut the emissions by half of the goal that we're trying to reach by 2030. So, this is going to have a significant positive impact. And for those that say the administration has a war on coal, I don't see that. I don't agree. I think the administration was slow to actually fight back against that charge, but they have. The administration now is saying we don't have a war on coal. And I think what's important is we need to look at the science here. And if we've already attained half of the goal that we're trying to reach by 2030, then the question becomes, what is the science that we can follow that will get us all the way to the goal? And that's where I think the focus ought to be, not on this superficial political comments about where we are with whether or not we can get to this goal by 2030. I'm actually optimistic. I think we can get there. What about the tax? Okay, why am I opposed to the tax? Well, I think we're all products of our experience. I'm no different. And I grew up in a working class family in Kinderhook in Columbia County. And my dad was a mechanic for Otis Elevator. When he was working, things were good. We had a living wage. But my dad spent a fair amount of time in the late 70s laid off. Mm-hmm. And that was the same time that gas prices and home heating prices were spiking. And that crushed our family. And, our family, the way we made it through the winter, I don't recommend this, but, Dad had to make a choice, is he got a kerosene heater. And he put it in the kitchen so it could radiate out. And it basically meant that our oil furnace, didn't kick off as much. And that allowed us to make it through the winter in a manner where we could afford it. And so, but what that's made me sensitive of today is energy costs. That's why I fight hard every day in the United States Congress to drive down energy costs. So I do believe that we can, at once, we can help protect the environment, lead the way in the world, but at the same time drive down energy costs. In fact, I must tell you, I never felt more understood in the last week than watching the Environmental Defense Fund. They did a commercial for me for my reelection, and I felt like they really got me. They said that here's a guy who's fighting to bring people together to get things done, who's trying to make a difference on climate change and protecting our environment, at the same time driving down energy costs. So I feel like they understand me. And I also believe there are some that say we have to pick a side. You got to be, and that's a frustration I have in Washington. You either got to be all for fossil fuels or all for renewable energy. Well, if you consider that a working class family now, some of them have to drive 30 to 40 miles one way to get to work, they can't afford a $5, price for gallon of gas. And they can't afford what we just went through. This winter we just went through was horrible. Our families that may be tuning in today just got crushed by energy costs. And I'm very empathetic with that. So, given my background and given my approach, I just think that it's the way to get to a place where we are protecting the environment and leading the way in the world. We ought to focus on research, development, and prototyping and reducing emissions at power plants and not going to a tax. Now, look, I'm willing to continue to research and look at this, but I'm just concerned that if you bring that tax, they may call it revenue neutral, but just experience would show that there's going to be a pass along that's going to end up right hitting our working class families.
While we're on the subject, there's been conflicting sides on the issue of hydrofracturing. So what is your position on hydrofracturing? How does this fit into your idea of environmental conservation and protection? Yeah. How did the two merge?
So I'm a federal legislator, and in a moment I'm going to explain what I'm doing to lead in this area in terms of legislation that I have authored and co-authored, and legislation amendment that I voted for. There's only been one vote in the United States Congress that impacts fracking, and I'm going to explain to you where I voted on that. And then I'm also a husband and a father. So even though I'm a federal legislator and most of this is a state level, I'm a concerned citizen in New York State. So I'm going to explain to you that. But before I do, let me just say this clearly. My opponent, he's going around saying certain things. The big difference, in fact, quite frankly, the only difference between my opponent and I when it comes to hydrofracking is that young man makes profits hand over fist. He is heavily invested as one of the part owners of the companies that make money on hydrofracking. He's the only candidate in this race that is making money off hydrofracking. My wife and I have no stocks and bonds. We're not making money off hydrofracking. So I just want to make that clear, that if you're looking for somebody who's making money off hydrofracking, then you got your candidate. It's the other guy. Now, what am I doing about this? Well, first and foremost, let me just say that, look, you take a look at history. And nobody thought in the 1960s that our country was poisoning our servicemen and women and the Vietnamese people with Agent Orange. But we were. And now we're going through, I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks, how we're bringing legislation to help our Vietnam veterans who were exposed to Agent Orange. In the 1970s, GE had a permit to dump into the Hudson River. And now we're cleaning up PCBs. So, my point is, I don't want this hydrofracking to be the Agent Orange or to be the PCBs of the 1970s. We need to make sure that we have confidence that whatever we do is going to protect our water and our air. So, I'm the Republican co-author of the FRAC Act. This is a bill that Maurice Hinchey, I believe, was instrumental when it first came to the Congress. It's a very simple bill. In an age when, bills have been over 2,000 pages, the FRAC Act is 4.5 pages. It's very simple. It's got 2 points. It basically says that companies need to comply with the Safe Water Drinking Act. That should be a floor, that should be a baseline standard. And the second thing is the companies have to disclose their chemicals that they're using. The fact that our federal government doesn't have this regulation in place now is wrong. I think it's widely known for those that are tuning in today that hydrofracking is going on all throughout the country, but yet we don't have this baseline federal regulation in place to protect our water and our air, and that needs to change. And so I'm taking action as the Republican co-author. Deanna DeGette is the Democratic author of the bill, and I'm on that bill. The second thing is we've had one vote in the United States Congress as it relates to hydrofracking. The amendment, the bill, would have taken away any federal regulations when it comes to hydrofracking. And I just think that's absolutely wrong. That's 180 degrees out from where we should be. We should have a baseline of standards for which then states, based on their own set of circumstances, can add to. But yet, we had an amendment on the floor of the House that would have prohibited any federal regulation of fracking. I voted no. I was one of 2 Republicans to vote no. And as I said, that is the only recorded vote that I'm aware of in my 3.5 years serving in the Congress, and that's my record on this. Now, beyond that, I'm also a husband and a father. So it's fair to say, well, what about the state? Governor Cuomo is dealing with this issue, right, and making a decision on whether or not he wants to go forward. And so, look, I have defended the fact that the state has taken a considerable amount of time to study this. Because, as I said, after what we went through with Agent Orange and after what we went through with the PCBs in the 1970s, the last thing we want to do is end up rushing into something and making a mistake. So, having extensive studies, I think, is the right thing to do. So when you have a federal floor, when you have state regulatory process, and then ultimately, it should be a community's right to decide. So I support the case, the recent case in the courts that said that it supported home rule, that at the end of the day, that if a town decides that they don't want to do hydrofracking, they should be empowered to make that decision. We don't want to have a situation where we have big government join up with big corporation and force decisions on localities. So I support the Supreme Court case, and at the end of the day, believe that if a community doesn't want to do hydrofracking, they should be empowered to make that decision.
What if one community says they want to do hydrofracturing and a community adjacent to it says they don't want it? Would one affect the other?
Well, okay, that's a fair question. So the first thing is we need a floor. We need a federal floor, and that's why I'm the author of the FRAC Act that would require companies to disclose chemicals. It would require their compliance with the Safe Water Drinking Act. And then our state needs to have a robust, in fact, I would argue the best in the nation, regulatory process that protects our water and our air. So that would need to be in place first, and then ultimately it would be a local decision for whether or not a community wants to proceed. Yeah, look, if a town adjacent to a town that wants to proceed, they should be allowed to make the case to the state that based on the state and the federal's regulatory processes, that they feel their water and air will be harmed. That's a case that they can bring based on the regulatory processes in place.
Another issue that a lot of people wanted to talk about, and I believe when we spoke, we had a live stream last year at this time, and we talked about immigration reform, and it's still very much a hot topic, especially with what's going on our southern border. So what changes have there been in attempting to find immigration reform? What's your stance on these issues? I believe you said that you wouldn't support reform without a clear path to citizenship. Is that correct?
Well, what I've said is this. We've got a broken system. There isn't any doubt about this. And if anybody thinks that they can put their head in the sand and pull it out, maybe tomorrow, maybe next month, maybe a year from now or 10 years from now, one thing's for sure. Whenever you pull your head out of the sand, it's going to be worse than it was the day you put your head in the sand. You take a look at what's happening now down at the southern border, and some said, well, the border was secure. Well, that's evidently not so, number one. So we've got to have a system that we can enforce. Whatever it is we come up with, and I've argued this, that what we come up with needs to comport with the iron law of the labor market. You can make any law you want, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't comport with the iron law of the labor market, it's not going to be followed. It's going to be broken. It's been the history of our country. We are at once a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants. My family, Irish Catholics, we came over, we were all laborers. I was the first one ever that had the opportunity to go to college. But this is my family's experience was no different from just about every other family's experience, that we came here and we worked hard and we made a difference for our country as laborers. And we have a system today where the numbers that we allow in this country don't fit the numbers of workers that we need. So here's what we need to do, and I'm published on this. I wrote an open letter to the Times-Herald-Record where I laid out my position in great detail, but we need to secure our borders so that we can, the law that we ultimately reform needs to be enforceable, so we need to have secure not just the southern border, but the northern border and the ports on the west and the east. We also need to recognize the fact that half the people here illegally now actually came here legally. They came here with a visa, and they then overstayed their visa. So when we bring forward this reform, it needs to reflect the fact that we have to track those that have the visa. And I believe we can do this. We have a system now called E-Verify. It's been voluntary since 1996. As part of this reform, it's going to have to become mandatory. And between the security, at the ports and at the borders, and the E-Verify with regard to employment, in regard to benefits, in regard to visas, we will be able to track and have confidence that we can enforce what we're doing. Now, in addition to that, we need a guest worker program, because we have some who particularly work in our agricultural sector, some that are not interested in becoming citizens, but they do want to work here. And some of them want to be able to have the ability to come here and go back. And the current worker program we have is not working. The H-2A program is broken. I brought forward legislation to fix that. We have not been able to get that into law. But one thing, if you listen to our farmers, they will tell you that reliability of a workforce that they can have access to is a key issue for them going forward. And if we have a situation where our farms fail, we're going to end up guarding food the way that we guarded oil, or we're involved in oil for way too many years. So I don't ever want to see us get into that business. So we need the immigration reform. Now, once you get a system that you're confident in, one that reflects the needs of our labor market, then you're left, well, what do you do with the 11 million people that are here? Well, we're certainly not going to send them back at this point. So, and we're not going to go for amnesty either. So there has to be a process in place that allows individuals to come forward and to plead guilty. And when they plead guilty to this misdemeanor of having broken our laws, then they would pay a fine. And that fine would be tantamount to back taxes. And then also there would be a background check to make sure that we're not giving legal status to somebody who's participating in a gang or selling drugs. And some would say learn English as well. But the process is this, is that we have to find a way to reconcile that we are at once a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants, and that we face the reality that we have a declining birth rate. And if we're going to continue to be a world leader, and we will, in the economy and in so many other areas, we're going to need to have a vibrant, vital workforce that includes, as we've always had, immigrants who come here, who care deeply about having a chance to be involved in the American dream and to be contributing members of our societies. I believe we can do this. I believe that we can get this entire piece put together, and I believe we'll get it done before President Obama leaves office.
Did you need to add something?
No, it's just time for the next question.
Okay. We've also had a lot of questions about Planned Parenthood, your votes on Planned Parenthood, and a lot of people say that you voted to entirely defund Planned Parenthood over the issue of abortions. I just wanted to give you a chance to explain your position on Planned Parenthood and its funding.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, let me just say that, as a husband and as a father of three, including two young ladies in their teens, that it's very personal for me that we have policies in place that ensure all Americans, including our young ladies and women, can flourish and have access to affordable health care. My record reflects a strong support of rural health care clinics. I'm a strong supporter of the Wellness Center at the Albany VA, where for the first time we're providing access to female veterans in their own clinic, which is very sensitive to their needs. So on the issue of Planned Parenthood, the issue there is one of federal taxpayer dollars paying for abortions, which, I don't think that, this is a very difficult issue, abortion. There are people feel very strongly on opposite sides of this. Where I think our district is, and where my representation is as well, is that in a very difficult choice, our empathy goes out for any young woman or any lady that feels that they're in that difficult circumstance. It's a private choice between a woman and her doctor. At the same time, there are some limits. This district generally doesn't go for late-term abortion up to the day of birth. Late-term abortion, this district doesn't support, nor does it support taxpayer dollars for abortions, except there are exceptions for both of these, except in the case of rape, incest, or life of the mother. So, it's certainly a very difficult subject, but I think my representation reflects the district, and I will tell you that I'm constantly in dialogue with everyone, including those in Planned Parenthood, and we'll continue to do so going forward.
But the issue of defunding, did you vote to entirely defund Planned Parenthood, or
No,
just to separate?
So, look, Planned Parenthood gets funding from myriad of places. There's federal money, there's state money, there is private donations that are sent. There was a vote to defund the federal portion of that. I did vote yes. I think there's more that Planned Parenthood could be doing to assure us that taxpayer dollars are not used for abortions. And so, again, this is an area where I continue to stay in dialogue with everyone, including those in Planned Parenthood.
Okay. There's also the issue of the Affordable Care Act and how Congress has repeatedly voted to repeal that. What's your thought now on the way the Affordable Care Act is now, and what more needs to be done with that?
Well, first of all, some of this reporting is not accurate. I'm not saying that you've done that, but there have been 3 votes to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and there have been over 40 votes to improve the Affordable Care Act. And a fair number of those votes included, a good number of Democrats who have voted, including some things that have become law. So when you hear people say, well, the Republicans have voted to, repeal the Affordable Care Act over 50 times, what they're not saying is that there was actually only 3 votes to repeal, and the rest were attempts to improve the law, including some of which became law. For example, the 1099 requirement was going to require small businesses to incessantly issue 1099s attendant to the new law. Now, Republicans and Democrats worked together with the President of the United States, and they eliminated that requirement. That's one of the times that they count. Then another one of these moments when they count as a complete repeal is this notion that if you like your health care plan, you can keep it. Well, when we took a vote on the floor of the House, we had several dozen Democrats, including some right nearby here, that voted with me to empower people that if they wanted to keep their health care plan, they could keep it. The other one is I'm giving you some examples. Another provision would put back to 40 hours the work week, because one of the definitions coming under the Affordable Care Act is essentially defining what full-time work is at 30 hours. And so what's happened across the country is there have been a number of workers that have been reduced to 29 hours of work so that the firm wouldn't have to comply with the Affordable Care Act. Well, a working class family who needs that take-home pay to go from 40 hours to 29 hours is not helpful to them at all. Now, I have to tell you that the unions, the building trades who support me, wanted me to vote for that bill. And I voted for that bill, and a fair number of Democrats voted for that bill too. So just, on the issue, because I think I read before I came here, I saw the question from the constituent. What they really wanted to know, and which you articulated, is, well, am I going to work to make this situation better? Absolutely. And what we can start with is just making it voluntary. It shouldn't be mandatory. If a person wants to go to the exchange and purchase a healthcare plan, they should be able to, but they shouldn't be forced to. And this is the thing. I think there are a number of things that we can do to make this situation better. That's one of them. We should have access to plans across state lines. That competition will drive down costs. We ought to have medical liability reform. We ought to have competitive bidding for prescription drugs. There are some successful pilot programs, including in our state, that we ought to scale up, like the Medical Home Project that we've seen. That's helped reduce the readmissions to emergency rooms. We know that drives down costs as well. But
we're running low on time, so
yeah.
I want to get to a couple more questions. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off, but also another question that came up several times was affordable pay for women, women's equality.
Yeah.
What's your stance on that? Have you voted to support equal pay?
Well, absolutely, women should be paid the same as men, and it's already against the law. This is the thing that doesn't get enough media coverage. If a woman and a man are doing the same job, and that woman's getting paid less than a man, it's against the law. And what we need to do is enforce the law. This is the Civil Rights Acts of 1963 and 1964, strong legislation that prevents the discrimination against women. So, we need more enforcement of that. And, I found it sadly ironic that, one day the president was talking about equal pay for equal women, and then the next day it came out that the White House was only paying women 78% of men. So, we can start. I will tell you, I try to lead by example. The lady right here on my left is my chief of staff. That's Stephanie Valley. She's the highest paid member on my staff. And, women make a strong contribution in our office in every single way. My deputy district director is a very strong leader, and Ann Muller. One of my LAs, Becca Shaw. We have all kinds of incredibly successful, competent females that are making huge contributions to my representation here, and I appreciate. Plus, not to mention, my closest advisor is my wife, Mary Jo, who's a licensed clinical social worker. So I think we need better enforcement. The Lilly Ledbetter Act was a bill that was signed into law, I think, in 2009 that eliminated the statute of limitations. So now, if there is discrimination based on pay, a female can not only sue, but they can actually go back in time and sue. So what we need is better enforcement.
All right. Another question that's come up repeatedly is the issue of campaign finance.
Yeah.
Your opponent has said that you take money from super PACs. You say he's self-funding his campaign. So what are you doing in terms of your campaign finance?
Yeah.
Are you beholden to these corporate donors?
Well, first of all, look, the record is this, that I'm the second most independent Republican. You can go to Open Congress, you can go there right now, and you can look at their website, and you'll see that I vote with party about 75% of the time. Second most independent Republican. The National Journal consistently has ranked me at the center of the House. So on the matter of independence, there are very few members, in fact only one other in the Republican Party, and very few members in the whole country that are more independent than I am. With regard to campaign finance, look, this is a problem, and we need to have reform, but my opponent's the last person that should be talking about this. He's part of the problem. Look, just like I have self-imposed term limits, I believe in a healthy rotation of office, and there ought to be term limits. I'm a co-sponsor of a bill that would bring term limits to the Congress, but I'm not waiting on a change in the law to do that. I'm self-imposing term limits. The same thing with campaign finance. I believe there should be reform. We should have limits on how much we spend, but I'm not waiting on the law. I offered a challenge to my opponent. I said, let's limit our expenditures to $2 million each, and then we both would reject all outside expenditures. Well, he rejected it. He said it was an election year ploy. Now, this is coming from a young man who moved into our district after the last election and filed to raise money as a candidate for Congress within 2 weeks. Now, keep in mind, that was within a month of the new Congress being sworn into office. So evidently, for my opponent, every year is an election year. And so, but the fact that he rejected this, he had a chance. We could have been a model race for the country had he agreed to this. And we could have negotiated this too. But no, he just rejected it out of hand. And look, my opponent started a super PAC. I mean, he's sitting there talking about campaign finance. He started a super PAC. And he has contributed to super PACs. And he talks about that he doesn't take PAC money. Oh, no. This young man takes corporate money. I mean, he gets money from the CEOs, from the COOs, and the CFOs. So, who has more influence in a corporation? The chief executive officer or the government affairs person? Well, I think we know the answer to that. It's the CEO. Not to mention, let me say one other thing too. Look, I said earlier in this interview that he's making record profits from the companies that do the hydrofracking. He's also part owner of Monsanto. I wonder how many of the viewers out there knew that. And he's part owner of Halliburton. He's taking these record profits and he's putting them right back into the campaign. So whether it's taking money from CEOs, taking his corporate profits and self-funding his campaign, starting a super PAC, or rejecting the opportunity to actually be a model race for the country, this guy's the last guy that should be talking about campaign finance. I think what we need to do is limit the amount of expenditures. And I think the best way to do that is we could have an algorithm that factors in media markets and how the media markets, and then that limit, then once you have that limit, you would have to go out and raise it and have to disclose where you got it from, but that would be how much you could spend in the race. And then there would be no outside money. Any outside money would have to be given to the candidate and have to be reported. So there wouldn't be any outside expenditures. I think that's the best way to ensure the spirit of our country, which is one person, one vote.
And you also mentioned term limits. So very quickly, you said you're not waiting for legislation. What is your self-imposed?
What I've said since the very beginning, since 2010, is the most I will serve is 8 years in Congress. I said that's the most I will serve is 8 years in Congress, and I'm going to fulfill that term limit pledge.
Okay. Were there any questions from that you?
I don't have anything right now.
Okay, I have more questions, but we're running low on time. Just very quickly, what about loopholes for corporations that pay very little in taxes? What are you doing to support, closing those loopholes
Yeah,
for
well,
corporations?
Let me just say that tax reform is something that's really important for our country. We've been now, almost 30 years, or over 25 years since we've had significant tax reform. And the way that the mental construct is one of your lawn. You may have a really nice lawn, but you still got to mow it every 2 weeks because your grass grows up. And the same thing in a representative democracy. You get a good tax reform like we did in 1986, and you still got to go back through and clean up the code. And we haven't done so since 1986. So I support going through the tax code, closing loopholes, and lowering rates. By lowering rates, that's going to help hardworking families. 2/3 of our families don't even itemize. So when you talk about lowering rates, that's a tax cut for 2/3 of American families right away. That's going to allow them to have more in their pocket to spend, and that's going to be a private sector stimulus for the economy. Also, our small businesses who are not C Corps, they're not corporations, our small businesses, they file through their own individualized tax return, and they actually saw their taxes, some of our small businesses, increase.
And what
So
about
we need to lower those, and we can do that by closing loopholes and lowering rates.
this issue of corporations, incorporating overseas to avoid
Yeah.
paying U.S. taxes? Anything like
That should be addressed in our tax reform. We certainly, the folks who stay here and invest in growth here, those are the ones that we should be incentivizing, not those that are moving jobs overseas.
We have just a few more minutes, so I'm going to let you give a closing statement. There's a lot of topics we didn't get
Yeah.
to, so I apologize to those readers who submitted questions, but if you'd just like to.
Well, just let me just say I appreciated this, and thank you very much for the opportunity. As I said from the very start, in a very challenging time, when a lot of the media talks about the divide, the negativity, and decline in our country, I don't see that. I see a country that, with leadership and with a vision that rallies us around that vision, that our best days are still in front of us. I'm doing my best to bring people together in the United States Congress. I'm a leader in no labels. This is a group of Republicans and Democrats, evenly split, that is looking to bring more functionality back to the Congress. I listed a whole series at the outset of bills that we've actually enacted with the president's signature. So this is very important that folks know that I'm trying to make a difference for them, both in legislative work and constituent work. Let me just say this is my final point. Beyond all that, I want us to believe. I want us to believe as a people that we can be self-governing. This is why I have self-imposed term limits. I think that it's not about one individual. What it is about us, that we can send somebody to Washington who will listen to us and to work hard for us and to realize that there are some issues, that there are strong, passionate views on all ends, and try to find a way to bring us together on that. It's not just why I self-impose term limits. It's why my wife and I give our pension back. After 29 years in the United States military, we earned a military pension. We're very grateful for that. But in the time I'm serving in the Congress, we give it back to the Treasury, to the taxpayers, so we don't double dip in these challenging times. I sleep on the floor of my office. When I'm not in Washington, I'm all over this district, because at the end of the day, I want folks to believe. I want them to believe that this can be done, that we can be a self-governing people, and that our best days are still in front of us. So I appreciate this opportunity to be here today, and I wish everybody all the best. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just give Evelyn one moment.